focus today is kind of at the level of the mesencephalon. And so you can see here the nucleus. This will be the cerebral peduncle here. I'm sorry, that's the cerebral peduncle. This will be the internal capsule here. The homework problem I gave you had a stroke or lesion that affected the optic tract on one side and the internal capsule. That kind of shows you that homework problem where the pathology was. Kind of shows the mammillary bodies here. And so the hypothalamus is kind of all of this area here. Okay, all of this. And this is the infundibulum. This is going to connect to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland sits in the sella turcica. And so from this diagram, you can see there are a lot of things that are really kind of intimately related here. For one thing, you can see that if anything happens here with the pituitary gland, which is right here, it's going to cut the chiasm, either functionally or mechanically cut it. We talked before, when you cut the chiasm, you're going to have visual symptoms. You're going to get a bitemporal hemianopia. It's important for you to understand how that happens. It's also important that we have the temporal lobe. So this is the temporal lobe will be over here. And this is going to be something we're going to talk a lot about called the amygdaloid nucleus. It's taken collectively is called the uncus. And so you can kind of see the kind of the lay of the land, where things happen here. So this is a cross section. And so the hypothalamus, hypo means below. And so we have the third ventricle and the thalamus. This area here is all thalamus here, thalamus here, the fornix is here, the cingulate gyrus is here, I'm sorry, the corpus callosum is there, and the cingulate gyrus would be up here. So what we're going to talk about today, for a large part, is going to be this area right here. So it includes the hypothalamus, that's this part here, the stalk of the infundibulum, and the pituitary gland. So we have 6 main nuclei in the hypothalamus, which are important for you to understand and know. The first of these is called the pars preoptica, and it includes the medial preoptic area and the lateral preoptic areas. These collectively are called the preoptic nuclei. And there's another part of the hypothalamus which is called the pars supraoptica, which is just above the chiasm. And some of the ones that we'll talk about today will be the supraoptic nucleus and the anterior hypothalamus. Those will give us some really important tracts that are important to understand. The third is called the pars pectoralis, which is the dorsal hypothalamic nucleus and the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus. The pars mammillaris is that part of the hypothalamus which is just above, related above and slightly posterior to the mammillary bodies. And so the medial mammillary nucleus, the lateral mammillary nucleus, the supramammillary nucleus, these are all nuclei that are important in regulating hormones. The pars lateralis gives you the lateral hypothalamus, and the pars posterior gives you the posterior hypothalamus. So these are the important nuclei that you need to memorize and understand. So you can see these a little bit better on this diagram here, and the relationship between the pituitary gland, which is right here, and the hypothalamic nuclei, which is up here. And you can also see the optic chiasm. You can see how close that is to all of these structures that we're talking about. And so we'll kind of go through these nuclei as we discuss the different diseases that affect them. But I think, from this diagram, I think the takeaway from this is that the pituitary actually is divided into 2 parts. There's an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary. And the anterior pituitary and the hormones that are associated with the anterior pituitary are all released by releasing factors in a kind of a special circulation called the portal circulation of the hypothalamus. And so these nuclei up here will release, what are called different releasing factors that then are carried in the blood down to the anterior hypothalamus where you actually release the hormones. So the hormones are not produced in the hypothalamus itself. The hormones are actually produced in the pituitary gland. But the release of those hormones is under negative feedback control. The same kind of feedback control we talked about last time. We talked about feedback loops. We'll see how they work here in just a minute. But it's important that this is not a direct neurotropic release of those particular hormones from the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary does have a direct secretion of two hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, which are actually synthesized in neurons in the hypothalamus, and they travel into the posterior hypothalamus where they are released directly into the bloodstream, and these hormones then target receptors in the organs that have the receptors for these particular hormones. So these are direct release. We also call it neural release, also called neurohypothesis, is the neural part of the release system of the pituitary axis. And these come from the supraoptic nucleus and the periventricular nucleus. So we'll talk about those two hormones in just a minute. But oxytocin and ADH in those particular areas. Now the anterior pituitary makes a number of very important hormones. And so the area of the hypothalamus that actually creates the releasing factors that produce these hormones that have these targets are listed in this diagram. So the anterior hypothalamus is going to have releasing factors that go down to the pituitary and release follicle-stimulating hormone. The preoptic area is going to release luteinizing, or have releasing factors that then trigger the release of luteinizing hormone. Dorsal-medial hypothalamus, prolactin, anterior hypothalamus, ACTH, thyroid hormone. The arcuate region gives you the growth hormone. Okay? So this is a summary of all you need to know for endocrinology. Y'all heard of endocrinology? It's a branch of medicine that really just studies the pituitary and the hormones that the pituitary makes. It's so important for this whole practice. It's just endocrinology. Anyway, so again, your hypothalamus is up here. So this is your hypothalamus, and we have all of these releasing factors that are carried in the bloodstream. They go down into the anterior pituitary, and then you release these different hormones. We're going to talk about each of these hormones in a little more detail. So, the first one that we're going to talk a little bit about is growth hormone. It's a somatotropic hormone. There's another name for it. Somatotropic hormone. It's a peptide, small peptide. Growth hormone is very essential actually for our growth as we mature. So we go from an infant to a child to a young adult to an adult. Growth hormone is an anabolic hormone. It's important to, it actually helps promote homeostasis. Growth hormone supports bone density. Growth hormone is also potentially, actually I must say, it's actually a drug. You can actually, it's a controlled substance, but you can go, a physician can order growth hormone. And in some cases where there's failure for a child to grow in stature, growth hormone can be therapeutic. So it promotes stature, it promotes growth, but it can also be abused. And so it's on the list of the federal drugs that are highly abused. And so growth hormone, in addition to the anabolic steroids, are used by athletes as doping drugs. And they can have some really bad side effects if they're used in a way that they're not intended, that the body didn't intend them to use. Adrenocorticotropic hormone is the hormone that regulates the secretion of cortisone and norepinephrine in the adrenal glands. We'll talk about that more in a minute. TSH, the thyroid hormone, TSH promotes the release of T3 and T4 thyroxine, which are important for controlling our basal metabolic rate, BMR. Okay, so these regulate the basal metabolic rate. Okay. Now, FSH and LH we kind of think about a lot of times together. The follicle-stimulating hormone secreted by the pituitary regulates the ovaries and the menstrual cycle. So it promotes the development of the follicle, and it also is an anabolic hormone. A luteinizing hormone is also important in terms of the menstrual cycle, and it's very important for the spermatogenesis. So, in fact, FSH and LH are both very important for both men and women in regulating reproduction. Prolactin is an interesting hormone. Prolactin is a hormone that promotes the development of the breast. And so a woman in pregnancy towards the third trimester will have really high levels of prolactin. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times when babies are born, whether you're a boy or a girl, little babies will often have a well-developed breast, and they'll have actually a discharge, which is called witch's milk. Y'all ever heard of that? That's true. It's not just a Halloween joke. Anyway, they have little kids, like to have a discharge when they're born. And that's the reason is because in utero, the babies get exposed to the high levels of prolactin that the mother has. And so prolactin is maintained in the breastfeeding mother by the sucking action on the nipple. And so the direct stimulation of the nipple keeps the prolactin level at a high enough level to where the breasts continue to produce milk as long as the mother is breastfeeding. And then when the mother weans the baby, it takes 2 or 3 weeks for the prolactin level to drop. And then once the prolactin level drops, the milk dries up. Yeah.
So is prolactin related to breast cancer by any chance?
Is it related to breast cancer? As far I don't know of a direct relationship. I mean, people, if you're asking the high prolactin level related to not, there are a lot of things that are, could be an indirect answer. Mothers that breastfeed tend to have less breast cancer. I don't know, maybe it's protected. Okay. So, and men have prolactin too. Okay, we just don't have as much. We have about 1/20th of the amount of prolactin that a woman has. Okay, and if you or I were to take prolactin, we develop very big old breasts. Okay, just like the girls. Less.
Yeah.
Exercise and prolactin. I don't know. That's a good question. I just don't know your answer to that. Whether exercise decreases it. Good question. We have to maybe research that one. These are all kind of negative feedback loops. And so I want to go through kind of one kind of important negative feedback loop, and that is with the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone. And so one thing that happens during life is that as you get into your 40s and early 50s, all you women will go through a phase of life which is called menopause. Basically, the ovaries fail. And when the ovaries fail, the pituitary gland still works really good. And so when you get the lack of the feedback from the estrogen back up to the brain, to the hypothalamus, what the brain sees, the only thing it can see is that it's acting like, you need more FSH because the estrogen levels are dropping. And so your brain tries to make more and more FSH to get, the ovary, to try to kick the ovary to continue to ovulate, but there's no more tissue to kick and ovulate. And so as a result, the FSH level is actually what is used to determine the fertility of a woman. And so a very high FSH level is a very good indicator of ovarian failure. Okay. Ordinarily, childbearing woman, good ovaries should have a very low FSH level. Okay. And the reason, follow me again here, is that the ovaries' response to FSH make estrogen. Estrogen is a negative feedback up to the hypothalamus, which says, well, I don't need so much TSH, I don't need as much FSH. Decrease that, I've got all the estrogen I want. And so the levels are ordinarily kept quite low. And so we use that actually to kind of judge the fertility. FSH is also a drug. And so if you were infertile as a woman, you could be given FSH to hyper-stimulate the ovaries, okay, and produce, instead of one egg per cycle, multiple eggs per cycle. So if you're doing in vitro fertilization, well, you want to hyper-stimulate, and so you would perhaps give a woman a lot of FSH to try to hyper-stimulate the ovary to produce multiple eggs, and then that way you can harvest the eggs, fertilize them, and get multiple embryos to implant back. So it's also a hormone drug, just like growth hormone. Okay. Yeah, the other thing that's kind of interesting is that a lot of times, because these are regulated by the brain, by the pituitary and the hypothalamus, there are a lot of things that can throw this whole cycle out of whack. So we know, for example, that a lot of stress, you mentioned running, but a woman that's really under stress, a lot of times won't have normal, will not cycle normal. And so that you might have a period of once every 3 months or something like that. So you actually stress, and the mental influences on the hypothalamus can kind of screw up the normal regulation here that in women. It also happens in men. As a matter of fact, if you look at the statistics, it turns out that male infertility is at an all-time low. And the level of both FSH and LH in men has, really gone down. And part of that is probably because our male bodies are not meant to be sitting in a classroom playing with a computer, where we're supposed to be out hunting and fishing and, doing all those macho men kind of things. And so we're changing the way our body is supposed to work. And so it's not, stress and environment and other things just affecting women, but it's have a devastating effect on men too. Yeah. Yeah, male fertility, your sperm count, is half of what it'd be if you were out hunting lions and tigers and bears. We tend to blame fertility on women, but a lot of times it's the men who can't produce either. Anyway, let's look at a little bit more detail. I chose a couple of these to kind of look at. So I picked out 4 diseases that you need to know in this class. The first is called Cushing's disease. Cushing's disease is an increased inappropriate secretion of ACTH. And so if I have a pituitary adenoma, pituitary tumor, that produces a lot of the inocardiotrophic hormone, that hormone is going to trigger in the adrenal gland a lot of production of both glucose and mineralocorticoids. So basically, you're going to get a whole lot more cortisol in your blood. Cushing's disease is to be distinguished from Cushing's syndrome. Cushing's syndrome is an all-encompassing kind of a basket. And it includes the drug-induced iatrogenic forms of kind of Cushing's disease, but it's really not Cushing's. Cushing's disease specifically is inappropriate ACTH causing Cushing's syndrome. And so people that have inappropriate ACTH will have Cushing's syndrome, but Cushing's syndrome doesn't necessarily mean that you have inappropriate ACTH. And in fact, the most common way to produce Cushing's syndrome is the use of cortisone. So people sometimes will take the steroids to suppress their immune system. We use steroids to treat diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. We use it to treat all kinds of temporal arthritis, things like that. So if we want to suppress the immune system, we'll give somebody a high dose of steroids. Okay? And so if you give somebody a high dose of prednisone or cortisone, you will, over a period of time, produce Cushing's syndrome. Now, people that have Cushing's syndrome have a very typical appearance. The kind of appearance will be a moon face and a hump. It's a fat hump on the back of their neck. So a humpback, a little hump here on the back of the neck, and a moon face. That kind of is a tip-off that you may be dealing with Cushing's syndrome. People that have the syndrome, whether you take exogenous steroids or if you do actually have Cushing's disease, they'll gain weight, they'll decrease bone density, okay? You will increase the blood pressure. Typically, you get kind of hyperactive, you lose your ability to focus, and you have poor short-term memory. You may also be irritable. In women, you can get excess hair growth. And sometimes you can actually get stretch marks like you get after pregnancy and development. Additionally, if you have elevated levels of cortisone, you will also get a cataract, you will get glaucoma. So we sometimes as ophthalmologists deal with this and have to treat some of the complications that you can get with the Cushing's syndrome. So in addition to this list, I would also add glaucoma and cataract, yes.
So a lot of those kind of conditions that are called the increased ACTH. Now, is there like a correlation then? If you increase like those exogenous steroids that you said, it causes an increase in ACTH as well?
Yeah. So if I give, let's run through that. That's actually a great question. So if I give you 50 milligrams of prednisone, and if y'all, anybody here ever taken a Medrol dose pack? Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. Okay. If you don't have Cushing's syndrome, do you?
I don't know. Can't concentrate.
All right. So that's not an excuse. No. So if you take the exogenous steroids for a short period of time, that's not long enough to suppress ACTH. Okay. Typically, we kind of use the kind of benchmark. You have to take it more than 2 weeks. For a Medrol dose pack, you don't take it for 5 days, at most 7 days. And so you're not going to suppress ACTH, but typically if you're on steroids for any length of time, over 2 weeks, you can't stop cold turkey because when you take the steroids, it will suppress ACTH. And so when you stop taking the steroid, you end up with just the opposite of Cushing's disease, which is called Addison's disease. Okay? And so steroids you have to give with the idea that you either use them in sharp, quick pulse and you get off of them, or you have to allow some kind of a time where you kind of wean off of the drug. Okay, that's very, very important. Very good question.
you know they say cortisone cause Cushing syndrome, but you have to get a lot of them before that happens.
Yeah, I mean, if you just take a mineral dose back, you're not going to get Cushing's disease or Cushing's syndrome. You have to take it for a very long time. So typically, we see this in people that take 30 milligrams or more of prednisone for 6 months. Okay? In women, and especially in women, this also will suppress fertility and it will decrease bone density. So you have to be very careful. And it's more troublesome in women than men. So you don't want to take steroids for an extended period of time. You have to take a steroid because you've got a bee sting, or if you got steroids because you hurt your elbow or you had swelling in your knee. I don't know what the reason why you take the knee swelling. If you just take it for a short time, it's not going to cause any problem. Does that answer your question? It's if you take it a long time, then you start having these kinds of symptoms. Somebody takes steroids a long time and you get all of this.
Do those like shots that you get in your joints if you have cortisone shots? Yeah.
No, that won't cause it.
That doesn't cause it.
No, it won't cause it. You have to take 30 milligrams or more of prednisone for 6 months, and then you get this problem. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Now, the opposite to Cushing's disease is called Addison's disease. Addison's disease is primary adrenal gland failure. And there are a number of ways that the adrenal gland can fail. But if the adrenal gland is not there, ACTH, just like if the ovaries aren't there, ACTH goes way up, right? Because it's now not regulated by the negative feedback from the mineralocorticoids and the glucocorticoids that the adrenal gland produces. And as a result, you can actually diagnose Addison's disease just like you're diagnosing fertility in women by elevated FSH. You can do this also by seeing a very high ACTH level. So the pituitary is trying to kick the adrenal gland to produce the hormones, but it's not. To produce the steroids and the norepinephrine, but it can't because it's not there. So the symptoms are pretty much the opposite. You get low blood pressure, you lose weight, you're chronically fatigued, you get hyperpigmented, your skin color turns more dark. It's like you have a suntan. A lot of times people get nausea, vomit, and diarrhea. They lose a lot of fluid. They become hyponatremic and hyperkalemic. In fact, you can go into an Addisonian crisis and die. Yes?
So the reason why this is the opposite is because this is when cortisol is low.
Yeah, this is low. This is when you don't have enough. And Cushing's syndrome is when you have too much. Yeah.
Is Cushing's very low concentration of ACTH in blood?
Cushing's?
Yes.
Cushing's disease is when you have way too much ACTH.
So for Addison's disease?
Addison's disease, you'll have way too much ACTH, but here, you won't have way too much cortisol, you'll have none. That's how you diagnose it.
So why does one function have a lot of cortisol?
Well, because in one case, the adrenal gland's working. In this case, Addison's disease, there's no adrenal gland there to kick. There's nothing to make the cortisol. As a result, just like when the ovaries quit working, your FSH goes up, well, here the ACTH goes up. Okay. Another one is a very common disease, hyperthyroidism. Okay. So you can either be hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, or euthyroid. And so they produce different kinds of symptoms. People that are hyperthyroid, remember the thyroid regulates your basal metabolic rate, all of your body, all of your cells. And so if you get hyperthyroid because there's too much thyroid hormone, you get nervous, irritable, you get a very high heart rate, temperature goes up, you perspire all the time. A lot of times people have a tremor. It's a constant. It's not a resting tremor or an intention tremor. It is a constant tremor. A lot of times people that are hyperthyroid have trouble sleeping, so it's one of the causes of insomnia. Anybody ever known somebody that was hyperthyroid? You've never known, you knew somebody hyperthyroidism? Anybody else? So one of the things, Vivian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it's my name.
Your aunt had it? What kind of symptoms?
Well, it was like, we started to get worried when she would like reach out and her hands would shake a lot, yeah.
It's a constant tremor. So the other thing that happens with hyperthyroidism, I didn't put it on this sheet here, is there is a type of hyperthyroidism which is called Graves' disease. You ever heard of Graves' disease? Graves' disease is a form of hyperthyroidism where the eyes start pooching out. You get very proptotic. And so people that have Graves' disease look like the eyes are going to pop right out of the socket. Okay? And so the reason that people get Graves' disease is because there actually is an antibody which is trying to mimic usually the pathology that's going on in the thyroid gland. It's increasing the thyroid hormone. There's an antibody that actually attacks the muscles in the eye, the extraocular muscles. So in Graves' disease, the extraocular muscles swell. They just get huge, and they push the eye out of the socket. Okay, it can be a very, very serious problem because if you get a lot of pressure, it will actually choke off the blood supply to the eye and it'll go blind. And so as a result, sometimes we have to do a procedure called an orbital decompression. You basically just have to break the bones around the eye to allow enough space to allow the eye to not get compressed. It's kind of a gross operation. But anyway, it's one of the things that as medical students and as physicians, you will undoubtedly, somewhere along the line, treat somebody that is hyperthyroid and may or may not have Graves' disease. Now, just the opposite is hypothyroidism. So, have y'all ever known somebody that had to take thyroid hormone? Anybody? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Known somebody that had to take several people here. So, if you don't have enough thyroid hormone, you get cold intolerance. Basically, can't stand to be in the cold. Usually gain weight, chronically fatigued, decreased memory and concentration. So how many people think they might have hypothyroidism? Yeah.
Is it more common in women? I think I
It
read
is. It's more common in women. Absolutely. Yes, it is.
why.
Why is it more common in women?
Yeah.
Well, you have to ask yourself, how do you get hypothyroid? What causes hypothyroidism? Okay, well, it turns out that the thyroid gland, the thyroid hormone, so the thyroid is producing thyroxine, T3 and T4, two very similar hormones that have similar activity, T3 and T4. And so it turns out that these actual hormone itself is a very heavily iodinated peptide. Okay, and so people get hypothyroidism if they do not get enough iodine in their diet. Okay, so worldwide, the most common cause of hypothyroidism is insufficient iodine in the diet. Okay, another way you can get hypothyroid is you can get an autoimmune disease, which is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and you get an antibody that just destroys the thyroid gland. It just destroys it, just like having no adrenal glands. You don't have the end organ to produce the thyroid hormone. It's very easily treated. You can take medicine, levothyroxine, which is replacement hormone, and you can reverse all the symptoms from hypothyroidism. It's very interesting that one of the ways we treat Graves' disease and hyperthyroidism is actually by giving a drug, which is radioactive iodine. And if you take radioactive iodine, or if you happen to live near a nuclear reactor that explodes, you're going to get a lot of iodine. Of course, iodine, the way you get it is the cows eat the radioactive grass, and it gets into the cow's milk, you drink the milk, and you get the radioactive iodine. And so actually it is a problem. In nuclear disasters, it's one of the big problems. You have to be very careful about what you eat. You have to restrict milk intake because you get the radioactive iodine. That's another issue. But if you want to destroy the thyroid gland, in other words, if you have hyperthyroidism, you drink a cocktail with radioactive iodine, it then destroys the thyroid gland. A lot of times, then you have to take replacement thyroid hormone. Okay. Any other questions? Very common problems. So in terms of that's the adrenal hypothesis. Those are the more important things that happen in the anterior pituitary. So in the neurohypothesis, we've talked about oxytocin. We talked about this in the context of basically during the third trimester, your estrogen drops, and what happens is your cervix begins to dilate. As the cervix dilates, you actually get a neural response that goes to the hypothalamus, and at a certain point, you get a very impulsive release of oxytocin. And oxytocin begins to cause the uterus contractions to synchronize and become very forceful. So oxytocin, or pitocin, is the hormone that's released by the neural hypothesis, these cells in your hypothalamus, in response to the dilation of the cervix that causes production of labor. The other one that we haven't talked about much is an interesting hormone called vasopressin, which is also ADH or anti-diuretic hormone. And to understand how this works, you have to know a little bit about the kidney. And so in the glomerulus of your kidney, you filter about 100 liters a day. So the glomerulus is filtering a huge amount of fluid. So you actually create in the glomerulus 100 liters a day. Most of the water gets reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. So about 80% of that gets reabsorbed. And then about 20 liters passes down to the distal tubule and actually ends up in this distal convoluted tubule, which is where the ADH works. So the ADH hormone is going to regulate the amount of water which is reabsorbed in the distal convoluted tubule of the kidney. And so if you don't have anti-diuretic hormone, if you don't have enough ADH, what happens to you? How do you know you don't have enough ADH? You're in the bathroom all the time, right? Constantly peeing, right? And so, if you don't have ADH, you're going to have to pee out, 20 liters a day. And we ordinarily don't have a fraction of that. If we have too much ADH, which can also happen, you get excessive ADH. If you have too much ADH, you tend to retain too much water. And in terms of your fluid balance, if you decrease the ADH, decrease ADH here, what happens is you retain more electrolytes than you do water. Okay? You're losing a lot of water, and as a result, you become hypertonic. So decrease anti-diuretic hormone. That means decrease it, we're losing too much water, you become hypertonic. You can also have inappropriate release of ADH from the pituitary adenoma, and if you increase the antidiuretic hormone, if you have too much ADH, you tend to retain too much water, you get fluid overload, you become hypotonic, and you end up with pulmonary edema. And that's the clinical way to diagnose ADH. Yeah.
You also get the pitting edema as well, like in your
Yeah,
legs?
absolutely. You get edema everywhere. You get pulmonary edema is one of the bad ones. That'll kill you.
So, I know that they say like when you're pregnant you have to pee all the time. Does that have anything to do with low ADH level?
I think when you're pregnant, the baby's pressing on your bladder, so you just don't have much volume there. So you're all the time going to the bathroom.
Too low ADH, how do you avoid dehydration?
If you have what?
Too low of ADH, how do you avoid dehydration?
Well, you actually then give the person by mouth, you give them the hormone.
Okay.
So I can write a prescription, and you go to the drugstore and you can get ADH. So I can write a prescription to replace it if you don't have enough. So actually, fluid regulation, this is a really big issue because there's my neurosurgeon over there. So when you operate on a patient and you put them in the NICU, okay, you're going to have to replace all these hormones, right? Because your brain's no longer going to be functioning. So that's why being a neurosurgeon takes 8 years, because you're going to have to learn exactly how much thyroid hormone, how much, all these other hormones, you have to replace the ADH and everything else that the hypothalamus doesn't make anymore. So that's one of your callings there. So your hypothalamus also regulates other things, like for example, hunger. So the lateral hypothalamus, if you stimulate it, it makes you want to eat. If you stimulate the ventral medial hypothalamus, you become anorexic. So the way typically these are studied is by actually destroying. So if you destroy the LH or the VMH, you basically can produce, if you destroy, for example, the part of your hypothalamus that makes you want to eat, you become anorexic. Destroy the ventral medial hypothalamus, and you gain weight and can't quit eating. So you can do this, and we do this in animals, so we don't usually do it in humans. If you destroy the ventral medial nucleus, you end up with a very fat cat. And if you destroy the lateral nucleus, you end up with a real skinny cat that will eat. So this sometimes happens in humans.